All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to not Monday, but in fact Tuesday, because we got Monday off, which was so nice, wasn't it? Wasn't it so nice on Sunday night to know that you didn't have to get up first thing Monday morning and trudge off to school? I will admit, I love my job, but that was a nice feeling Sunday night. Um, I hope everyone had a good weekend. I hope you relaxed and chilled out and probably had to get some work done. But let's see. So Tushin Sana's here. There you are. Good morning. And Ryan is here. Good morning. And Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. And Nicholas is here. Good morning, Nicholas. Simrat is here. Good morning to you. And Abby is here. Good morning, Abby. And Nicole is here. Good morning, Nicole. And Sarah is here. Good morning, Sarah. Um, right. Where did we leave off? Okay, well maybe a little bit of a review first. So last week we introduced this whole sexism thing just by clarifying a few kind of concepts that have to do with people's sex, people's gender, people's sexuality, and kind of the way that they express themselves to society. And what I kind of tried to convince you of was that these things are kind of a little more separate than maybe sometimes people would like to believe. And so, again, I can't speak for all of your cultures out there, but here in the West, once upon a time, we believed that there were men and there were women. Everyone was straight, everyone was heterosexual, and men were interested in women, women were interested in men. End of story, right? But again, as Western culture has kind of become a little more liberalized and people feel a little more safe to express who they are, we're kind of finding out that, oh, actually, there are a lot of people who are having different experiences, right? People whose gender identity on the inside isn't really in alignment with their physical body, people who are sexually or romantically attracted to people of the same gender or of all genders, or maybe of no genders at all. Good morning, Sophie. And so, again, because it's now safe to do this, people are expressing themselves, right? People are saying, yeah, this is my reality, this is my experience, this is who I am. And so, again, we talked about sort of gender. Well, we can see gender expression here, and we could probably talk about sexual identity as well. Those things are very much contingent on culture, right? What culture will allow. If culture does not allow homosexuality, you probably won't see any in that culture. But the data that we see suggests that it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that people aren't free or safe to express themselves. And so, again, in 1920 in Canada, gay man was not a sexual identity that people could express. But were there gay men? Yes, there were, absolutely. But do we know who they were? Could we kind of see them in society? No, we could not. Right? So we talked about that, the difference between sex and gender and sexual orientation and sexual identity. We did a little, not experiment, it was kind of more of an activity with the alien, and we came up with a lot of rules for acting like a boy or acting like a girl. And again, I tried to convince you that this was just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's tons and tons of rules and beliefs and values that go along with our gender roles, some of which we are required to, kind of follow if we want to be accepted by society. Some we can get away with breaking, and it's not a big deal. I don't know about you, but I'm sure all of you don't follow every one of these rules for your gender. I know I certainly don't. Guys are supposed to be into sports. I am not particularly into sports. So, you can get away with breaking a few of them. But regardless, society will try to get us to conform to gender roles, right? And when we don't, we will sometimes face social consequences, right? We'll sometimes face social punishments. Yeah, and that kind of led us, or sorry, before I go there, one of the things I wanted to point out to you, or one of the points of that exercise with the alien, was to determine that, or to think about the fact that yes, there are a lot of rules, and a lot of them aren't really strongly based in biology. A lot of them have to do with what society teaches us, right? What we are told to be, right? And so, men are, I think in many cultures, men are taught not to express all their emotions or not to express certain emotions, right? But doesn't mean we don't have them. Doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means that we are conditioned to be less emotional, right? To kind of keep our feelings under wraps. And maybe a little later we can get into why that's not so great. But anyway, many of these rules are culturally constructed, right? Society has decided what men should be and what women should be, and then those messages get taught, and we are supposed to conform to them, right? And that led us to this documentary called The T Word, right? So it's produced by Laverne Cox here, and we met Laverne at the beginning, and she's an actor. She's in Orange is the New Black, among other things. I'm not sure the other projects she's been in, but Orange is the New Black is kind of what I think has made her famous anyway. And in this documentary, you saw that we've met about half a dozen young transgender people, right? And they're kind of talking a little bit about their experience and their lives and what things are like for them and what their experiences have been in the past. And I asked you a bunch of questions here, and I just wanted to review a few of those right now. Let me combine the first two questions if I can. What's been these young people's experience in terms of gender, to kind of sum up? What's going on with these kids? I guess in a way they have some sort of awakening. They became aware of their gender, right? And when did that happen? Yeah, when they were quite young, right? So this is something that happens, I think, this is something that's happened with all of us, right? We all became aware of our gender, but it probably happened very early in our lives, and it probably wasn't a big deal, right? I think, and again, I'm assuming that all of you are cisgender people and not transgender people, and if you are transgender people, you don't have to tell me, but I'm making an assumption here. But it probably wasn't a big deal for you to, if you were born into the body of a boy and you realize that you were a boy, that's probably a completely common thing, and it wasn't an issue, right? It wasn't a point of drama. But for these young people, it was, because in fact their gender identity wound up being kind of not aligned with their physical body, right? And so there was some confusion on their part and on the part of their parents as to, what is going on here, right? What is going on here with this child, right? And so how did this kind of situation where these people they're transgender, their physical bodies do not align with their gender identity, what kind of experiences have they had? How has that kind of affected their lives? Let's start with Kai, the basketball player. How has his gender identity affected his life? Sure. So Kai has kind of transitioned in the public eye, right? Kai played women's basketball before. Now he's playing men's basketball, and he's kind of living his life as a man. What else is going on in his life? Probably lots of things, but what do we see? Yeah, so so in the media, he was asked a lot of questions about his gender identity and who, did he have a crush on his teammates and, you know, questions about his biological anatomy down there, right? And what was kind of the big deal about that?
People following social rules and not celebrate.
Right. So people who are in minoritized groups sometimes people in dominant groups feel that they don't have to follow the same social rules with them. They don't have to give them appropriate respect, right? And we heard about that with Adam Pearson. We heard about that with some of the people that Adam talked to in his documentary. We heard about that with Sinead Burke, right? Who, people take pictures of her all the time. And here we see the same thing happening with Kai, right? The same thing happens with Kai where apparently we're allowed to ask Kai about his, sexual anatomy, in his pants, right? And no reporter would dream of asking that question to any other athlete or celebrity, right? The celebrity would take off the mic and say, "That's it, we're done," and walk out, which is what they should do. But for some reason, Kai is asked that question, and in kind of an internalized oppression kind of way, Kai tries to answer it and be polite, right? But really, in any other case, most celebrities would take off the microphone and say, "Yeah, that's it, we're finished," right? And so, again, people in minoritized groups and hear Kai simply because he's a trans man or a transgender person, he's not given the same respect as other people, right? What about let's see. What's going on with Shane and Jessica? Shane's the young man. He's dating Jessica. They were jumping around in the pool last we saw them, I think. What's been some of the experience of Shane?
His mom told me that he'll never find love.
Yeah, thanks, Mom. Right? Yeah, his mom kind of told him that he would never find love, and I think she was concerned for him. I think she was, legitimate. She wasn't trying to sort of say anything mean. She was just concerned, right? Because she said, well, gay men are going to want to date a man, and lesbian women are going to want to date a woman, and you're neither of those things, Shane. You are a transgender man who will want to date you, right? And so, again, it didn't sound great, right? It's not an uplifting comment, but I think his mom was probably just confused and maybe concerned. But lo and behold, he discovers Jessica, right? And Jessica's in a relationship with Shane, and again, it's what should we say? Should we say anything about Jessica? Yeah, I guess that's an aspect of sexual orientation, right? Some people are simply attracted to one gender or another, but for Jessica, having that gender identity as, cis man or cis woman seems not to be that big a deal to Jessica, right? She seems to like Shane for who he is as a person, and she's not looking for a cis man or cis woman. She's more open to, who the person is as a personality, right, rather than a gender. We met Ari. Ari was the young man who was having the birthday party. He's also a musician, and he said that some male students complained about him in being in the locker room. And why was that kind of confusing and weird? Why was it confusing and weird?
They don't know the man or woman.
Well, the young men in the locker room were probably a little bit confused, right? And probably they were confused because nobody talked to them about gender or sexuality in this way, right? And so they don't really understand what's going on with Ari, right? But again, what is Ari's gender? Yes, so his gender is he's a trans man or trans young man, I guess. But his gender identity is male, right? And so again, is that a locker room for males? Yes, it is, right? And again, the boys seem to be uncomfortable because they were concerned that Ari was going to look at them while they pee, right? Which Ari was like, that's ridiculous. Nobody watches anybody pee, which I think I can agree with Ari. That's true. That doesn't happen. But also they're confusing gender and sexuality, right? Gender is who you are, right? On the inside. How do you identify in terms of gender within your society? Sexuality is something different, right? Sexuality is who you are interested in having a sexual relationship with. Who does Ari seem to be interested in having a sexual relationship with? Men or women? Women, right? Ari is a straight man, right? Or young man. He's a straight man, right? And so, again, these guys are kind of getting gender and sexuality tangled up and confused. And again, it's worth pointing out that, it's weird because we divide up our locker rooms according to sex or gender, but really what we're doing is dividing them up according to sexuality, or we're assuming that they're divided that way. But of course they're not, right? There's gay guys going to men's locker rooms all the time, right? So again, we've just kind of assumed that we're breaking things up according to sexuality, but really we've just broken them up according to gender. But either way, it's not a thing, right? Because Ari is a straight man. He's not interested in looking at anybody pee, but least of all, he's not really interested in checking out other guys because he's interested in women, right? We saw him be very interested in that girl Rachel coming to his birthday party, right? He's a straight man. But again, those guys get a little confused. I'm going to leave number 7 for now because we were just getting into that dating thing, right? And so again, Shane was a little bit concerned about dating because again, he's not like most people, right? Most people are cisgender, right? Most people have a gender identity inside. They present that gender to society, and their biological anatomy is in alignment with that, right? But for Shane and for Ari, that's actually not quite true, right? Their gender identity is one thing, they're expressing themselves to society is one thing, but their biological anatomy is different, right? So both of them are a little bit concerned about dating, what happens when things become physical. I have different genitalia than my partner might expect. How's that going to go? How do I have that conversation? How do I tell them? How will they react, right? And again, dating is always, even with two cisgender people, dating is always kind of a little stressful and a little uncomfortable, and there's always, you never know if the other person's going to like you or not, and so all of those things are still in the mix for people like Shane and people like Ari. But imagine this added thing where, oh gosh, my body is not quite what this person is going to expect. How do I tell them? How will they react? It's very kind of I assume it's very scary is what it is. And so that's kind of what we're going to see today. We're going to hear from Avery, and we're going to hear more from our other youth that we've met already. And we're going to meet, I think, one more young woman whose name is Lorraine, if I remember. We'll meet her as well. Before we jump back into this, are there any sort of questions or concerns or points of confusion or things that we need to address? Yeah.
On number 7, Katrina just said that the point that the parents didn't support, like the person didn't have the parent to support.
I think there's probably a lot of answers to, a few answers to number 7. That's probably one of them. The idea that, that, yeah, Shane didn't experience any kind of parental support, right? Instead of, it probably would have been nice if his mom said, there's someone out there for you, Shane. Don't you worry. You'll find them, right? But again, his mom kind of said, well, who's going to want to date you? Which is, which is not very empowering and not sort of confidence building. But again, she was probably just concerned about her son, right? And concerned if he would be able to find someone. But again, it seems that he has, right? Anything else that needs to be?
Is gender identity cisgender, transgender?
I think you could probably say that. I think actually maybe what you could say, Mulder, is that your gender identity is kind of the inside feeling, but also how you express yourself to society. And what did you say? Your gender? Did you say gender identity?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's probably both of those pieces. That's a good question, actually. That's a good question because, and it's something that I think we're still working out in society. Because again, we just started talking about this transgender stuff maybe 10 years ago with seriousness, right? With without kind of too much prejudice. So we just started talking about this, and I think we're still working out, how we should think of these people. So we've got, once upon a time we had men and women. That's it, right? Now we've got people like Ari and Shane and Avery and Lorraine and Kai. We've got all these different people, and so where do they fit, right? So let's take Kai, for instance, the basketball player. Is Kai a man? Should we just think of him as a man regardless of anything else? And do we still have two genders, but everyone whose gender identity is male goes in this category, and then everyone who's female goes in this category, whether you're a cis woman or a trans woman, or a cis man or a trans man? Or do we have more than that? Do we have men and women and then trans people? Or do we have men and women and trans men and trans women? Or what do we have, right? And so I think that's still open in terms of how we're kind of thinking about gender in society. Do we have 2? Do we have 3? Do we have 4? Do we just need to throw out the idea of gender categories altogether and just deal with people as they are? Well, I think we're still working that piece out, right? And so, I think most of the young people in our film here would identify themselves as a trans person, but in many cases they simply want to go through society and be perceived as the gender that they feel inside, right? And so Shane, when he's walking down the street, he says, yeah, society sees me as a young man. That's how I want to be seen. The end, right? And so he is a trans person for sure, but he's not asking society to realize that all the time, right? He's just trying to go through the world, as a young man. And the young women we see in this film are the same, right? They just want to go through their lives and move through society as a young woman. They don't necessarily want to be seen as a trans person by every single person they meet. Right? So again, and that's something that would be a good question for a trans person, right? In terms of how should we be thinking about this in society? Should we be trying to take these people in the documentary and fit them into categories, or should we simply say, we have these categories of male and female, man and woman. They work for some people, maybe they don't work for others. The end, right? I don't know, and that's because the culture is changing, society is evolving, people are still kind of discussing that question, and I don't know, to be honest, I don't really know where we are yet. I don't think we've kind of come to a decision as a society how to think about that. So that is a good question, Mulder, because I don't think we've landed we've landed anywhere on that yet.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, always.
Cis stuff. What's the meaning of cis?
Cis is a Latin prefix, and it means near, or near to, or on the side of. So I used to work, for example, in Siberia during my grad program, and we worked around the shores of Lake Baikal. Baikal's it's a huge lake in sort of eastern Russia, and so they had kind of imagined the Cis Baikal is the side that's kind of on the west side, so it's kind of more close to civilization. The other side is Trans Baikal, so it's further away from civilization. So cis and trans are two Latin words that mean kind of, I think, near and far. And so cisgender is kind of near to the gender, trans is far. Whether that makes sense in English, I don't know, but I think they're two Latin prefixes. Yeah, good. Other questions? Oops. No other questions for now? Okay. Let's hop back into the documentary here. I think we watched 25 minutes of it on Friday. Is that correct? Maybe? I kind of forget where we were. We were right around... Okay, let me just... Give me 1 second here, online people. I'm just going to determine where we were so that I can tell you where to start, because I've forgotten. Oops, there we go. Alright, so, okay, right, Kai, oh, there's Avery, okay. No, before that, there's Kai. Yeah, I think we were just finishing with Shane and Jessica here. Okay, so let's see, 23, 29. So online people, maybe what I'll ask you to do is start at around 23 minutes or so, and then watch to the end, and then once the documentary is over, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and talk, okay? So from about 23 minutes to the end, then a 10-minute break. The link is in Microsoft Teams as it was before, and we'll see you back here once the video's over and once our break is over, okay? So see you in a bit. here. All right, and we are back. So we've reached a conclusion to our T-word documentary, but I want to ask you a few questions here based on what we saw today. Why is dating kind of more difficult for trans people? What did we kind of see there?
People want to clear out what the biological ethnicity is.
Seems to be right. So we saw Avery, met this guy online, maybe with a dating app or something, and they were, exchanging messages back and forth, and it seemed to be going pretty well. But of course, she had to figure out when to tell him that she is a trans woman, right? And so she does. She says, "I have something to tell you. I'm trans," and then this guy comes back and says, "Oh, sorry, I'm not into that," right? And so, yeah, rejection always hurts, whether you're a transgender person or a cisgender person. It always stinks to have people reject you. What did you think of that rejection, or that sort of turning down of her? Is it okay? Is it not? Should she have told him? Should she not have told him? Did she tell him the right way? Did he tell her the right way?
It's personal preference.
What's personal preference?
When they are trans men or women.
Okay. Why would you say that?
It's I feel like that's asking their genitalia is a reasonable question.
Yeah.
Because you want to know what you're getting yourself into.
Well, and maybe I would take that a step further and say that, him asking about Avery's genitalia was, it's a very personal question, right? It's a super personal question, and you probably wouldn't ask it of just anyone. However, the answer to that question is, is to some degree influenced by this guy's sexual orientation, right? Like, he may be into, he is into women, right? Because he thinks he is texting, he is messaging a woman, but what that woman is biologically is probably connected to his sexual orientation, right? And he may not be, he just may not be interested in trans women, and that might, that's nothing against him. I don't think that makes him a horrible person. It just has to do with what he is and is not attracted to, right? And so I think it's a tough spot for Avery, because Avery has to, needs to tell her, potential dating partners. She needs to tell them something personal about herself, and those guys have to kind of think about, okay, is this something I'm interested in or not? And I would suggest that, again, that's connected to your sexual orientation, and again, that's not something that you can necessarily change, right? You can't decide that, either you're okay with that or you're not. And so it's a very difficult place for Avery to be in, and for her potential dating partners, right? Because they have to think, okay, well, how much does the biology matter to me? A lot, or a little, or not at all, right? And so we see with Shane's girlfriend Jessica doesn't seem to, what Shane's genitalia are. Jessica doesn't seem to mind one way or the other, right? She's happy with who he is, end of story, right? But for other people, that might not be the case, right? And so for Avery, I think it's probably very, getting rejected is the worst, right? Especially when you like someone and they turn you down, it's the worst, right? And for her, it's probably a more difficult process of finding an ideal kind of dating partner for her. And so it's probably more difficult. There's probably more rejection, and it's probably hurts every time, right? But also there's I think there's a sexual orientation thing too. So it's I don't know. I don't. I think what happened there is probably hurtful and not what she wanted to happen. I don't know how. I don't know how you get around that. Until maybe in 30 or 40 years we live in a society where nobody cares about anyone's genitalia and we're all just interested in people as individuals. Maybe. But we're not there. But we're not there now, right? And so Avery has this kind of and all these young people have this kind of extra hurdle to deal with, right? Yeah, what was passing privilege? They took Shane started talking about that. Shane and Avery started talking about that immediately when we started watching. What does that mean? Yeah. So Avery uses this term clocked, right? And so this is a slang that we use in Western society. Like if if you're speeding, like if you're driving too fast on the road and the cops have that little gun, they clock you at 80 kilometers an hour in a 50 zone, and then you get a speeding ticket. That's being clocked, right? And so she's kind of using she's using that expression to say clocking is where people identify that she's not a cis woman, right? She's a trans woman. And so of course everyone that we meet here seems to want to not be clocked, right? They want to have passing privilege. They want to be able to be accepted or seen as the gender that they feel inside. And, these people to varying degrees have passing privilege. Why are trans people the victim of bullying or discrimination or harassment or violence? And we see that toward the end of the documentary here, particularly in terms of sexual assault or rape or violence. Why are these people more often the target of that? Yeah, so they seem to be singled out as different, right? As not normal. What else? Yeah, people dehumanize them. How are people dehumanized in any context or in this one? Right. So there is a stereotype. There are prejudicial ideas out there that trans women, and particularly trans women of color, are prostitutes, right? Are sex workers. And we see that Lorraine and Daniela both have to deal with that stereotype, right? Lorraine lives in Louisiana, and in Louisiana, I think it's Baton Rouge. Is it Baton Rouge, Louisiana? Yeah, the main sort of street is Bourbon Street, right? And so Bourbon Street is where all, the cool bars are and the clubs where they're playing live music, and it's a big party out in the streets every night. It's that kind of, Bourbon Street is that kind of place. And so Lorraine says, yeah, when she goes out, she wants to look cute and, go to the bar and have a drink with her friends and maybe dance and have fun like everybody else. But the police seem to pay extra attention to her, right? And so she says that the police claim to be keeping them safe, but really they're just harassing her because they see her and they imagine, oh, here is a sex worker, here is a prostitute, here is someone who is engaged in illegal activity, right? But she's not. She's a university student going out, having some drinks with friends, like tons of other university students do across the country. But yet she's going to be singled out simply because of who she is, not because of what she's doing, right? She's not doing anything different than anyone else, but it's because of who she is, right? She's a trans woman, and she's a trans woman of color, right? And so that's worth pointing out that there's an intersectionality thing happening there, right? She's a member of multiple minoritized groups at the same time, right? She's a black woman, she's a person of color, she is a woman, and she is a trans person, right? And so that makes her very vulnerable in society, and it makes her sometimes the target of discrimination. And so the police seem to be discriminating against her, and Danielle experiences discrimination as well. What happens to Danielle? Daniela, sorry. What happens to Daniela? A couple things happen to Daniela. So Daniela is raped, first of all, right? So she's raped in an alleyway in New York City, and then she goes to the hospital, and then what happens?
When the doctor finds out that she's a transgender, they accuse her that she's just claiming that she's raped just for money.
Right. So Daniela goes into the hospital to be treated, and at the hospital, if you are raped, they can collect evidence, and so if they manage to catch your attacker, that evidence can be used to find them guilty in court. It's called a rape kit, is what it's called. And so she goes to the hospital to have this evidence collected, and maybe she needs some medical treatment as well, I'm not sure. She goes there, and everything's fine until the nurse realizes that she is a trans woman, right? And then what happens? The lenses come down, right? Just like we talked about with the resumes, where black sounding names were being discriminated against in favor of white sounding names, the lenses come down, and all of a sudden Daniela's not being seen as a woman, she's being seen as a trans woman of color. She's being seen through that lens, that stereotype that says, oh, this must be a prostitute, this must be a sex worker, right? And so all of a sudden, the nurse switches, and she's like, oh, are you sure? Are you sure it wasn't sex work? Are you sure, your client just didn't pay you and now you're trying to get back at him? Are you sure this actually happened? And again, Daniela almost, I've been using this metaphor of like lenses coming down, and Daniela almost describes that, right? She said all of a sudden, just like, she switched, right? She was seeing Daniela not as a person, but through this stereotype of sex work, right? The other thing I'll ask you here, can a prostitute be raped? Can a sex worker be raped?
Yes, probably.
Yes, probably? Yeah, when they're working, it is still consensual, right? So, the client, the John, hands over money, and sexual activity occurs, but consent can be withdrawn at any time, right? Just because you said yes 10 minutes ago doesn't mean that there's still a yes now, right? So, sex workers can be raped, right? Things can happen. Yeah, Nicole says, whoops. Yeah, Nicole says yes too. Yeah, sex workers can be raped. Just because they have sex for money doesn't mean that there's no consent allowed, right? And so even if Daniela was a sex worker, which she's not, she could still be raped, right? And she could be very legitimately going to the hospital to report it, right? But unfortunately, that's dangerous for most sex workers because sex work is often illegal. And so if a rape happens, most sex workers won't report it because they'll get themselves in legal trouble by doing that. If it's unwilling, it's rape. It doesn't matter if money has changed hands. It doesn't matter if the answer was yes 10 minutes ago. If the answer becomes no, then whatever happens after that is sexual assault or rape, right? And so, again, even if Daniela was a sex worker, she very well could have been raped, but of course she is not, right? She's a young woman who was just walking down the street minding her own business. But yeah, you can see how powerful that stereotype or prejudice is that immediately this nurse starts seeing her differently, right? And again, she'd already been talking to her, right? She'd already been interacting with Daniela and asking her questions. And then as soon as that piece of information came out, as soon as she realized that she was a trans woman, she starts seeing her through those stereotypes, right? And Daniela sees it, right? Daniela's like, oh, here we go. Now I'm going to get treated not as Daniela. I'm not going to be seen as a person. I'm going to be seen as a trans woman, and maybe a potential sex worker as well, right? Why are these women so vulnerable, right? We had some pictures on the screen of a collection of young women who had been murdered, right? Within, I think Laverne said, within a 41-day period, 5 women were murdered. And why are these people so vulnerable?
I remember one woman saying that they also have privilege, but the issue comes from anti-LGBT groups.
They have privilege, but it comes from anti-LGBT groups. Maybe. Can we flesh that out a little bit more? How can we answer this? Why is she so vulnerable? And some of these other women too. Let's think about the what was her name? The woman who was murdered name was Isla Nettles. Is that her name? I think that was the woman who they were Laverne and Avery and Daniela were sort of bringing flowers to the place where she was killed, and that's kind of a shocking case, right? Because she was beaten to death in the street, and the police pulled the attacker off of this woman, right? So the cops were there. They were the ones who grabbed him while he was doing it. She died, sadly, and yet they have not charged him with murder. How do you not charge him with murder when you catch him in the act, right? Like the police were there. The police were the ones who grabbed him. Like, how do you not have the evidence to charge him with murder when the police were actually witnesses to the crime? How does that not happen? And it seems like nobody's too interested in following this story up, but I ask you, if this was a white woman, if a white cis woman, would people be more upset about this? The fact that there are no charges. Apparently it's okay to just beat someone to death in the street, have the police catch them, and then, I'm sorry, we've got other things on our desk to deal with, right? How is that in any way okay? Okay. Before we kind of transition out of the T word here, I didn't mean that to be a pun, but I guess it is. Before we move away from this, is there any other kind of questions or outstanding issues that kind of came up for you as a result of what we saw? Things that we should talk about or you would like to hear about? Going once? Going twice? Okay, we'll move on. All right. So, oh yeah, that was that. Okay, that was that too. Right. So this leads us to this person here. Does anyone know who this is? Well, I guess I'm telling you who he is. Have you have you heard of him before? No? Okay. So as you can see here, Jordan is a professor of psychology at University of Toronto. University of Toronto, if you know, is probably one of the more kind of prestigious universities in Canada. All the major universities are good. We don't have so much, like in the States, some universities are kind of Ivy League and some of them are middle and some of them are low. In Canada, I feel like all of our major universities are kind of on the same level for the most part. University of Toronto is kind of an old one, so I feel like it has a little more prestige, but either way. Jordan is a psychology professor at U of T, and Jordan here found himself in a bit of a controversy a couple of years ago, and the controversy had to do with pronoun use. Okay, and so what had happened was we heard in the T-Word documentary that words were important, right? There were certain ways of referring to transgender people, and there were certain pronouns that were appropriate, right? And so for people like Shane and for Ari and for Kai, those individuals want to be addressed as he, right? He and him, those are the appropriate pronouns for them. When people like Avery and Daniela and Zoe and Lorraine, the appropriate pronouns are female pronouns, right? She and her, right? Those are the pronouns we want to use. And seemingly that seems to be such a simple concept as to not be worthy of consideration. But as it turns out, a couple years ago at University of Toronto, it turned into a bit of a controversy, a bit of a thing. And so what happened is that the university sent around a memo to all of its staff and to its professors and said, "Dear staff and faculty, the University of Toronto respects people of, diverse people of all genders and sexualities. We want to create an inclusive environment and a safe environment for people. So please use the appropriate pronouns that students ask you to use," right? And so if Daniel comes into my class and says, "Hey, I would like to be referred to as he or him," then the University of Toronto is asking me to respect Daniel's wishes. And if he wants me to refer to him as she or her, also I should respect what Daniel has asked me and to do that, right? To create sort of a safe, inclusive environment. So far, so good? Okay. Jordan Peterson here disagreed with that. Jordan Peterson felt that, well, I'm not really going to say exactly what Jordan Peterson felt, because what I want you to do is do a little exercise in critical thinking and figure out what Jordan's argument actually is, because Jordan disagreed with that memo and disagreed with what the University of Toronto was asking him to do in his classes, in his classroom. And so I have a short article for you to read that talks about that idea. Okay, so I just want to remind you of a couple things. This is a critical thinking exercise, and so again, we're looking at why people believe the things that they believe and what are the reasons they have for either accepting that belief or suggesting that other people should believe that too, right? And so Jordan, of course, spoiler alert, Jordan is going to make an argument about why he shouldn't have to do that. And the University of Toronto and some LGBTQ activists are going to make an argument saying that in fact he should do that. He should use correct pronouns, okay? So remember, we're looking for statements or claims, statements that things are a certain way or aren't a certain way, are true or aren't true, and we're looking for an argument, a conclusion, a main point, and then supporting premises, right? So ideas that support that conclusion. And so I have an article for you to read. The article is called "He Says Freedom, They Say Hate. The Pronoun Fight is Back." And so again, this article is maybe 2 years old or so, something like that. And again, as you can see here, it reports on the controversy surrounding pronouns, referring to transgender and gender-neutral persons. I'm asking you to find or determine what both arguments are And then, do they have valid arguments, right? So are their premises true, and are they logical support for the conclusion? Maybe we'll look a little bit into if this is a significant issue or not. Pronouns don't seem like a big deal, but maybe they are, I don't know. And how do we decide who to support? How do we decide which side of this argument to fall on? Because again, there's going to be two opposing viewpoints, Jordan's and the University of Toronto. Okay, so I will let you start reading this article. I will let you, as if it's my, I'm going to give you the opportunity because I know you're so eager. The article, of course, is in Microsoft Teams. It's under Files, and I think it's called just that. It's called it's called He Says Freedom, They Say Hate. So you'll see it. I just popped it into Microsoft Teams yesterday. So I'll give you some time to start reading. It's not a very long article, but I want you to, again, to try to figure out what the arguments are. What is Jordan Peterson's main point, and what are his supporting premises, and what is the other side arguing? And it might be a little difficult to figure out because, again, they don't lay out their argument in perfect succession. You'll have to kind of pull pieces of it from the article as they occur. But they are there. Okay? All right. Let's have a look at this short article, but see if we can find two arguments in it. Okay? Okay, good people. So we're probably not done reading yet, and as you can see by the clock, we're about out of time. So maybe we'll end it there for today. We'll come back tomorrow. We'll have a few minutes at the beginning of class just to kind of finish reading this, and then we'll talk about the two sides to this story and how we can kind of understand this controversy around Jordan Peterson and pronouns and things like that. So until then, I hope you have a nice afternoon. Thank you for your papers that you submitted. I'm gonna try to have them back by mid this week if I can, although I've got a lot of reading to do by then, but I'm gonna try and have them all done so that we can move forward. But otherwise, yeah, that's it for today, and I'll see you tomorrow or in 20 minutes. So, okay, bye.